Welcome to the Harvard Alumni webinar on Mastering the Business Presentation. I'm Tim Calkins, and I'm delighted to be spending the next hour with you talking about creating great presentations. We are joined today by people from all around the world. I'm live here in Cambridge, but joining us we have people from, and let me check my monitor, we've got people here from Boston, of course, from Houston, from Florida, from Cleveland, from San Juan, from all over the world, the Harvard alumni community. And it's a pleasure to be here. And what we're going to do over the next hour is we want to devote this time to talking about how do we create great business presentations. And that's really the goal today, is to give you some ideas, some things to think about as you put together and deliver your next business presentation. That's our overall goal. Now, before we get into it, just a little bit on logistics, things to keep in mind as the webinar sort of unfolds. Three things in particular. Number one, there's time for Q&A. So if you've got questions, just go ahead and post them in the chat box. And at the end, we're going to spend some time and answer your questions. And go ahead and post whatever you want related to presenting or related to chickens. We'll cover whatever comes up. This is also going to run for an hour, and we're going to shoot to bring it in right at about the 60-minute mark, so you can sort of plan for that. And rest assured, all of this will be posted later, so if you want to come back and watch it again and again, or send it to friends and family, you can do that. Give us about a week, and we'll get that all posted, and that'll be available. Before we get into the material, let me just spend a little time on my background to give you a sense of who I am. So I went to a small and some would say inferior school in Connecticut for my undergraduate. I went into consulting then at Booz Allen and spent a couple of years doing strategy consulting in New York. Then I went to HBS and got my MBA from there. From HBS, I went over to Kraft Foods, and I spent 11 years at Kraft managing brands including Taco Bell and DiGiorno and Kraft barbecue sauce and Miracle Whip and lots of different brands. But along the way, I started teaching, and eventually I shifted over to Kellogg, and I now teach at Northwestern at the business school there. I teach marketing strategy, biomedical marketing. Along the way, I've written some books. I've written a book on defensive strategy, one on marketing plans. But I also wrote a book on presenting. It's called How to Wash a Chicken. That's my newest book. And that book is full of all sorts of tips and advice on doing great business presentations. There also is a little bit in there on washing chickens. So if you have questions about that, you can read the book too, or you can look at it for advice on presenting. One note today, we're going to spend most of our time today on presenting and how do we do that well. We're not spending a lot of time on chickens, although I will note we do have today a chicken, and that of course is a positive thing. So if you have questions about chickens, we'll field those along the way as we go. All right, so three things to cover. Number one, why presenting is so important and why I think it is really worthy of our attention and thinking about. Then why people struggle, why do people have so much trouble when it comes to presenting, and then 5 recommendations. There's a lot of ideas in the book. It's all full of tips and suggestions. Today I'll give you 5 things to think about, things that you can put into play right away when you go do your next presentation. But let me start off and talk a little bit why presenting is so important. Now, the reality, though, is that in most cases, people don't like presenting. And one of the things that's really true, if you were to ask most people if they want to go to a nice presentation, most people would say, no, thank you. I think Jerry Seinfeld actually captured it quite well in this clip here.
I saw a study that said speaking in front of a crowd is considered the #1 fear of the average person. I found that amazing. Number 2 was death. Death is number 2? This means to the average person, if you have to be at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
Well, and I think he captures the situation really quite well there. Most people really don't like presenting. And there's a segment of people who do. I've done a lot of research on this. There's a small group of people, and maybe you're in this group, and they love presenting. They love writing presentations, delivering presentations. It's a small group. Most people really don't like presenting, and they struggle with it. And I notice it's the same thing at business school. And business school students have the same trouble that we all do when it comes to presenting. I've done a lot of research over the years with my students at Kellogg, and I've done surveys like this. So I would ask them, how do you enjoy presenting? Do you enjoy that? And how good are you at presenting? And how good are your classmates? And it's an interesting set of results. When I ask them how much do you enjoy presenting, The average back there is 6.51 on a 1 to 10 scale, decidedly mediocre. How good are you at creating and delivering presentations? On that, I get a 6.82. How good are your classmates? 6.84. And all sort of mediocre scores. But that's where we are in some ways when it comes to presenting. Most people, we don't like it very much. We don't think we're very good at it, and we don't think our colleagues are very good at it either, which is a bit of an issue. Because whether we like it or not, presenting is incredibly, incredibly important for success in the business world. And if you want to be successful as a business leader, you've really got to present well. Why? Well, number one, leaders present a lot. So if you currently work in the business world, you know this. People are presenting all the time. And as you work your way up the ranks, people tend to present more and more. It's a big part of the job. It's what we do. It also is really important to sell your ideas. If you want to have an impact on a brand, on an organization, you've got to get your recommendations through, and that means you've got to sell the recommendations, which means you've got to do great presentations. More and more we're communicating now via Slack, we're communicating via text, all of these things. But when it comes time to make a big decision and a big recommendation, people still get together. They still look at presentations. You're not going to go invest $300 million in a new factory based on a Slack conversation. It's just not what's going to happen. People are going to sit down. They're going to go through it. And so if you want to have an impact, you've got to be able to present well. You've got to be able to deliver your ideas with conviction and with clarity. The other piece on presenting is that presenting has an enormous impact on your personal brand. Presenting really does shape how people think about you. Now, I teach about branding a lot, and one of the things I've really come to learn over the years is that personal branding is so important. If you've got a really strong personal brand, which is to say people think you're smart and you're strategic and you do great work, what happens is, your career moves ahead. You're given good opportunities. You're given high-profile assignments. You tend to get advanced quickly up the ranks. You get a nice bonus. Everything good happens. Now, on the other hand, if you've got a brand that isn't perceived well in your organization, that's a real problem because people, they question your work. They don't give you great assignments. They give you a lot of scrutiny. It's a much more challenging environment. But the way we build a great brand is more than anything is the presentations we do. That's really our chance to shine. That's the chance to have a huge impact on our personal brand. If we present well, people think we're smart and talented and gifted. And if we don't present well, they form a very different set of opinions. Partly because that's your moment in the spotlight. That's when you really have exposure to senior management and when you can really convince them that your potential and your brand is well positioned. So it is incredibly, incredibly important. The other thing about presenting is that's what people are really looking for these days in the world of business. People who can take all of this data that we have, all of this analysis, all of these analytics, and turn them into good recommendations. So every year the Financial Times does a survey of recruiters. And they ask people, what are you looking for when it comes to recruiting? And then they ask companies, what's hard to find? So this was a survey just recently in the Financial Times on most difficult skills to recruit. So what's hard to find? And the 5 things this year that came back: ability to influence others, strategic thinking, drive and resilience, big data analysis, and ability to solve complex problems. What's interesting to me is that 4 of these are really directly about the presentations we put together and deliver. Ability to influence others, that's all about how do we present our ideas. Strategic thinking, what is strategic thinking? I don't know, but I think it is the ability to take a really complex situation and simplify it down and turn it into a tight recommendation. Big data analysis, that's really all about this too. Big data, the challenge is not the data. The data is fine. The challenge is making sense of the data and turning the data into a really compelling recommendation. And then ability to solve complex problems, that's the same thing. It's how do we take all of the complexity in the world and turn it into a recommendation, a presentation that makes sense, that people can follow, and that intuitively works. So it's an incredibly important skill when you look at it. Now, people struggle when it comes to presenting, and they do it for lots of reasons. Partly because we don't train people very well on this, and I think that's true broadly. Partly because it's inherently difficult. The other thing I noticed, though, is that very often when it comes to doing business presentations, people use the wrong models. So I'll ask people, how do you become a better presenter? What do you do to present, better and to get better at it? And a lot of people, they tell me, what we do is we watch TED Talks. Because TED Talks are fabulous. We love TED Talks. And we watch TED Talks, and that helps us present better, and that helps us be more effective in front of a crowd. And that's great. I mean, we really love TED Talks. There's a lot you can learn from TED Talks. But be careful, right? A typical TED Talk, what's the setting? Well, the setting is a big room, usually, lots of people in the audience. You're on a stage. You can't really see anybody. It's generally in the dark. There's no questions. Nobody challenges your numbers. It's about 12 minutes. Everybody's happy to be there. In many cases, they've paid money to be there. And at the end, everybody cheers and you walk off, and it's great, and we love TED Talks. The only problem is, I've been to a lot of business meetings in my life, and I promise you, none of them were like that. No, the typical business meeting is not like a TED Talk at all, actually, right? The typical business meeting, well, what happens? People wander in late. Everybody's sort of grumpy. Somebody's got a cup of coffee. Somebody's eating a donut. I mean, it's a very different experience when you think about doing a typical business presentation. Everybody's grumpy, and people challenge your numbers. The presentation goes on for an hour, goes on for maybe 2 hours. It's just a totally different thing. In any event, a TED Talk is really not like most business presentations in the world. So be very careful about that approach. When you watch TED Talks, you see people do things that just aren't going to work when it comes time to doing a real business presentation. The other thing I hear a lot, though, from people when they think about doing a business presentation is they say, you know what I do to get better? I just watch Steve Jobs videos. And I try to watch Steve Jobs videos because he was such an amazing leader, a gifted presenter, and I try to just model myself on him. And again, Steve Jobs was incredible and was a master presenter. But there's just one problem in copying Steve Jobs. And the problem is very simple, which is that you, I am pretty sure, are not Steve Jobs. I mean, none of us are Steve Jobs. And the reason that matters is because what he could do and what he could pull off is very different from what most of us can pull off. Here's just one example. So if you watch many Steve Jobs videos, what you realize quickly is one of the hallmarks of a Steve Jobs video is that he was always finished with that great line, there's one more thing. He'd get to the end of the big presentation, and then he would leave off and he would say, there's just one more thing. One more thing.
So thank you. Oh, wait a minute, though. Wait a minute. I forgot. There is one more thing. I do have one last thing I forgot to tell you about. There is one more thing. But there is one more thing I forgot
And
about.
he would do this again and again and again.
But we do have one more thing.
It was really the hallmarks of a Steve Jobs presentation. He would just do that again and again and again. Now, here's one thing, though, if you could take from this webinar, if nothing else. For you, when you're doing your next big business presentation with a bunch of senior executives, right, don't do that. Don't do that. I mean, that's just not going to work in a business setting. You get to the end of the meeting, you're packing up all your materials, the senior people are getting organized, and you're like, but wait, there's one more thing. The test just came back, or we're delayed on the start ship, and, they're going to say, well, what is that all about? That's just a disaster. So be careful about what you learned from Steve Jobs, too, right? It's different. A business presentation is a very unique thing. It's not like a speech at a wedding. It is not like giving a poetry recital. It's a business presentation. It's a very different thing. So 5 recommendations. Here's 5 things to think about as you start putting together your next presentations. All right. The first one is to be very clear on the purpose. The big insight here is very simple, which is that you should only do a business presentation if you really need to do a business presentation. Everybody's busy. Every second emails are piling up and text messages are coming in. So you never want to waste people's time. Wasting it doesn't enhance your career. And some of the worst presentations are when someone's presenting something and the audience is like, we just don't care about this. It's not important for us. They tend to tune out, makes it difficult to present to them. If you don't need to do a presentation, you just shouldn't do it. So one of the first questions you always ask yourself is, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? What's the purpose? Do we really need to do this presentation? Great presenters have a sense for it. They know there's a time to present. and there's a time not to present. And knowing the difference is incredibly, incredibly important. I would then take that purpose, the reason you're presenting, and put it right up front of the presentation. So 5 things every presentation should have, every business presentation. A title page, of course. The purpose, right? Put that right up front. Get that on the first page, maybe the second page. Here's the reason we're here. Here's the reason we're doing this presentation. Then the executive summary, the agenda, and then at the end, the conclusions and the next steps. If you put those 5 things in all of your presentations, you're going to help your presentations. More than that, you're going to help your audience. When you're clear on the purpose and you're clear with the executive summary, you really help your audience think about the presentation and understand what they're supposed to be doing. You know, it's a very different thing if you're trying to approve a new product launch versus you're reviewing the results from the first quarter. These are very different things. One, you've got to make a decision today. That's a very different thing. The other one, you're looking at some information. So put that right up front. Just be very, very clear on it. I actually recommend before you do a business presentation, it's useful to put together a presentation brief. Now, if you've spent any time developing advertising or creative, what you know is that developing the advertising brief, the creative brief, is a key part of the whole process. You want to be upfront, very clear on what you're trying to accomplish. The same thing is true with a business presentation, and writing this down ahead of time, early on, will help you a lot. So put in the brief, number 1, the purpose, right? Why are we doing it? Number 2, who are we presenting to? Who's the audience? In particular, I'm interested in who is the most important person in the room. Who's the senior person that I'm most focused on? What's the format? I mean, is it a webinar format sort of like this? Is it a big room? Is it a little room? Is it a one-on-one chat over a table? The format has a big impact on how you're going to assemble the presentation. And then other considerations. Are there other things we should be thinking about? For example, if we're presenting right before a long weekend, we're going to want to keep that in mind because we know we don't want that presentation to run long. On the audience, 3 things in particular to think about on the audience. Number 1, their preferences. Number 2, their priorities. And number 3, their perceptions. Their preferences, so think about that. Everybody likes certain things. Some people like the color blue. Some people like the color red. Everybody had certain preferences when it comes to presentations. So one of the things you want to think about is, what is my audience like? And if they like a certain thing, well, then you generally want to do that. At one point, I was presenting at Kraft to a senior executive who was very tough to present to. But one of the things I knew about him was that he hated it when there were slides and the slide would build over time. So things would come flying in. One point, then the next point, he hated that. So I knew whenever I was presenting to him, I was never going to do that because he really didn't like that. So think about the preferences. Then you want to think about their priorities. So a presentation is at the core a marketing endeavor. It's a marketing task. Great marketing is based on really understanding your audience and understanding who you're talking to and what are their priorities. So when you put together your presentation brief, you want to ask yourself, what are the priorities for my audience? What's important to them? If somebody's really interested in the first quarter results, for example, if that's their priority, well, I'm going to want to talk about how my presentation and my recommendation will connect to the first quarter results, because that's the core of what they're really interested in. And finally, you want to think about their perceptions. What do they know currently? Do they know anything about this project? Do they not know anything about this project? If I met with somebody a week ago, I'm going to do a very different presentation than if I met with them 2 months ago. I'm starting in a different place. If I think they're positive about the project and enthusiastic about it, and if they think it's going well, that's going to be a very different presentation than if they think it's really troubled and having some issues. So really think about what are their perceptions. If you think about all of this before you put together anything else, it's going to help your presentation a lot. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, you want to begin by finding the story. Now, a typical way to write a presentation, and the way many people do this, is they do the following things. They identify the topic. They say, here's what we're talking about. They gather up the relevant information. So here's the studies that are important and all of that. Put things in a logical order. They create the pages, and then they go and they do the presentation. Sort of a typical way, a logical way to put together a business presentation. The only problem is this doesn't work very well in the end. The problem here is number 2. There is too much relevant information in the world. Right now, if you think about it, there is so much data, there's so much information available to us that if you gather up the relevant information, you're going to find yourself swimming in data, and you're going to end up with a presentation that is full of data, it's clunky, it's plotting, it's not going to work very well. So instead of doing this, what you want to do instead is you want to say, what's the story? What's the story I'm trying to tell here today? And finding the story in a business presentation is so important. Like, what's the overall story? So Carmine Gallo, he does a lot of big presentations and coaches people. As he says, creating the story, the plot, is the first step to selling your ideas with power, persuasion, and charisma. Succeeding at this step separates mediocre communicators from extraordinary ones, right? Or Chris Anderson from TED. You just let the speaker take you on a journey, one step at a time. Thanks to our long history around campfires, our minds are really good at tracking along. And there's something to that. You got to find the story. So instead of presenting data, you want to say, here's a sequence of facts, here's a story that I'm going to tell you. And you want to lay it out where one thing works to the next, to the next. Now, how do you find the story? It's not easy to do, but there's different ways you can do it. So 2 ways that I like to do it, and there's lots of ways to do this, are storyboards and then speak, then write. So a storyboard, very simple. All you do, you take a piece of paper and you just draw 2 horizontal lines, 2 vertical lines. You then have 9 boxes. The boxes then each represent 1 page in your presentation. And all you do is you just jot down what's the point on each page. You know, the first box, maybe it says, we launched the new product in January of 2018. The next box, the product got off to a great start. The next box, it got off to a great start because the distribution built much better than we expected. And then the 4th box, right? And that one, it's all about how that's translated then into a full year over delivery on the plan. And then the next, and you're just trying to figure out what's the flow. Now, when you do a storyboard, a couple things. Number 1, you only want to do this with a pencil. Or if you're doing it on a whiteboard, that's fine with an erasable thing. The reason is because at this stage, you want to be very quick to rework the story. And on each page, all you're going to write is like 4 words. New product started strong. That's it. Because you want to be very quick to get rid of a page, to move things around, to try to figure out what's the flow of it. It's not easy to find these things. I have a colleague at Kellogg who does a lot of work now with data visualization. And we love data visualization. The boxes, boosh, all this stuff. It's beautiful. Don't worry about data visualization right here. The problem with data visualization is if you build some cool graphic with all these fancy things, the problem is you're going to fall in love with that, and then you're going to want to put it in the final presentation. Then it may not fit at all, but you're still going to want to put it in there because it's such a cool visualization. This isn't the time. All you're trying to find out is how does this flow? One step to the next, what's that story? The other way to do it is you can speak and then write. The insight here is that we are all pretty good when it comes to speaking, and most of us, have trouble when it comes to writing. And this is how people are. As babies, we begin by speaking. We don't start writing. As infants, we don't say, can you give me a pencil there and I'd like to jot down some thoughts. No, we babble and we say things. And we're all pretty good at speaking. And indeed, in life, this is true. If I were to ask you, what did you do last weekend? Well, you could probably tell me. If I were to say, could you just write for me maybe a 1,200-word essay on what you did last weekend? Well, then many of us be like, oh my gosh, that's a big job. I don't have time I got this writer's block kicking in already. No. Now, when you do this, all you do is you just say the story. What are we covering in this presentation? And you speak it. And when you speak it, what happens is you tell people the story. So we launched the new product last year, got off to such a good start, and the distribution was really strong, and so we beat the plan, and it was a brilliant year. But now everything's going south, and the business is slowing down. The story, that's your story right there. And as you speak it, you either record it, that works, or you have someone with you who jots down the key points. But that becomes your story for your presentation. One way or the other, you've got to find the story. And until you find the story, how all this data connects, how all this information links together and leads to a recommendation, you really can't go any further. Once you have the story, then you create the pages, but only once you have the story. Every page you have a headline, 3 or 4 bullet points, simple charts, parallel structure, just basic, simple pages. That's always what we like. Each page is simple, easy to follow. When you're doing a presentation, you really like people to just nod their head. And if your pages are simple, they're going to do that. A page like this. 2017 was another good year, growth in revenue and profit. There's the headline. Headlines are great. Always state the point in the headline. Headlines are great. There's the headline. There's the data. The data supports the headline. It's a nice, simple page. You look at this page and you say, okay, and it works out fine. And that's what we're after. As Daniel Kahneman says, when you're in a state of cognitive ease, You probably are in a good mood, you like what you see, believe what you hear, trust your intuitions, and feel your current situation is comfortably familiar. And a good presentation is like that. You know, Kahneman has this whole theory of System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is easy stuff. What's 2 plus 2, right? What's the weather today? That's all pretty easy. Then there's hard stuff. What's 24 times 37? Or how many times did the letter E appear on this page? All of that's much harder. And you want to make things easy. In a presentation, you want to just nod your head. And if a presentation is built well, your audience will just follow along. And they'll nod their head step by step by step. And by the time they get to it, the recommendation will seem obvious and convincing and natural. I remember back at Kraft Foods when I was there, sometimes we'd put together these really complicated recommendations. And at the end of it, people would look at it, and it was just so simple. They'd be like, oh, that was obvious. I mean, that's easy. And of course, it wasn't easy at all, but it was just laid out in such a way that it really seemed easy. Number 3, always pre-sell. Now, pre-selling, I think, is the one thing you can do more than maybe anything else to help ensure your business presentations are going to go well. Pre-selling, what do you do beforehand? Before you go to a presentation, you go meet with people ahead of time. The insight here is very simple, which is that surprises can be exciting and fun. And we love surprises. We love surprise parties. We love surprise trips, surprise presents, all of that. But in a business situation, surprises rarely go over well. I mean, if you're in the business meeting, you're like, surprise, we're missing the plan. That's just not going to go well. So you don't really like surprises. So before you go to a big business presentation, you want to go ahead and meet with people in advance. You want to take them through the recommendation. Before the meeting starts, you should ideally know exactly where you stand in terms of the recommendation. Are people on board? Are they not on board? And if you do this, wonderful things happen. If you pre-sell, all sorts of good stuff. Number 1, your recommendation gets a lot better. You get input. You get guidance. If there's a problem, you find out about it before the meeting. So your recommendation gets a lot better. The other thing that happens is you get supporters. When you meet with somebody ahead of time and take them through a recommendation, they're more likely to turn into a champion, a supporter for your recommendation, and you build a group of supporters. The third thing that happens when you're pre-selling something is that you get more confident. When you walk into a room and you know everybody supports your recommendation, well, you're going to deliver that recommendation with a lot of conviction and with a lot of confidence. Now, pre-selling, when you're doing this, a few things to keep in mind. Number 1, you want to meet with people well in advance, 2 days, 3 days, a week in advance. You never want to meet with them right before a meeting, because the problem is people are going to tell you things. They're going to be, have you thought about how this is going to implement? Have you thought about how the sales force is going to react to this? Have you thought about the IRR, the NPV? All of that takes time to address. If you meet with someone a week in advance, you can follow up on all of that, and then you can circle back with them. And sometimes you'll need to do that. Go back and follow up to make sure you've addressed their questions. Bring a draft, not the final document. So when you're pre-selling, you always bring a draft. And whatever you bring should say draft, rough drafts, initial scribbles, because you want it to be clear that this is not done. This is a work in progress. You want their input. Even if your recommendation is already done and the presentation is already bound, it's already done, still, you write on the front, draft, rough draft. If you go in with what looks like the final document, it looks like you're not actually looking for their input. You're just trying to sell them on the recommendation. That's not the goal. You're trying to create collaborators in your project, not trying to just sell it. So make sure it says a draft. See questions, input, suggestions, get their input. Are we missing anything? All of that. And then be sure to act on the input. And this is incredibly important, but often I find people neglect this. Now, when you're pre-selling, sometimes what's going to happen is people are going to tell you some really stupid things. So, they're going to say, look at that. The font is different on the x-axis and the y-axis, and the labels have a different font. And you'll be like, well, sure, that's a different font, and who cares? But they'll be like, you should probably fix that, Now, here's what happens. If you fix it, when you get into the actual meeting, the person in the audience is going to notice it. And they're going to then think, oh, well, wait a second. They listened to me. They have good attention to detail. They valued my input. This is all good. I like this person a lot. Now, if you don't fix it, because it was a stupid idea anyway, who has the time? The problem then is, right, they're going to have very different thoughts. They're going to notice it also. And now they're going to say, oh, They didn't listen. They don't have good follow-through. They didn't value my input. They don't think much of me. I don't like this person anyway. I've got a real problem with this recommendation, and you just lost them. So even on the littlest idea, some people, if they're really sophisticated at this, what they'll do is they'll deliberately drop in a mistake in their presentation. So like in a headline, they'll put in like 2 ands, and then they'll take somebody through it ahead of time. And the person will say, hey, wait, you got 2 ands there. And they'll say, oh, so good, you caught that. Thank you so much. And then all of a sudden they've got people on board. I don't recommend it, but it does work. It does work. Set the room, number 4. All right, setting the room is a really important step in the process. Again, this is one people don't spend enough time on, I think. And the insight here is that if the room is set up well, you're going to naturally deliver a good presentation. If there's space to move around, you're going to move around. If the room is set up, if it's going to work for participation, you're going to get participation. A few things to keep in mind, though, when you're setting up a room. And you always want to get there early, and you always want to look at the space you're going to be doing a business presentation. The first thing you're looking at is you want to figure out, do I have anywhere to move around? Now, in a good business presentation, ideally, you'll be moving around. You'll go a little bit this way, you go a little bit that way. You're sort of moving around the room. But you can only move around if there's space to move around. So the first question is there actually space to move around? Often you might get to a room and it might be set up like this. Now, this looks like a normal setup for a room. You got 4 tables, there's a projector, a screen, a logical setup. Now, who would set up a room like this? Well, of course, facilities people would set up a room like this because it looks like an obvious way to set up a room. Now, the only problem is facilities people, generally speaking, aren't presenters. And you get a room like this, and this is actually a terrible room for presenting, because where exactly are you supposed to stand here? I mean, you can stand in the corner, I guess there, but you can't stand in the middle. That's sort of weird. You won't be able to get around the tables because the tables are going to be near the projector there. In this room, you're sort of trapped. All you can do, in a way, if you want to get out of the corner, is walk in front of the bright light. And if there's one thing you never want to do when you're presenting, is walk in front of the bright light. I mean, you've seen people do that, and it's always an awkward moment. They're sort of squinting. They're like, oh, they got and it's just you're in the wrong place. Worst case, the bright light is like right across the forehead, or it's splitting their body. And no, you never want to be in front of the bright light. If you can ever see the bright light, you're in the wrong place. So this is a really tough room. Here, though, all you need to do here is very simple. Just push those tables back. You open up some space. You can move around now. It's a great room to present. If you have some time, you get there early, you can make sense of the room. So number 1, make sure you got space to move around. Number 2, find a place for your notes. Now, I'm a big fan of notes, especially in a business presentation, because usually there's lots of numbers to keep track of. And if you have some notes, you're not going to stress about remembering the numbers, and you're not going to get them wrong. The only thing, though, is when you're doing a presentation, you never want to carry your notes. If you're carrying your notes, one of 2 bad things is going to happen. Either you're going to look at your notes, and when you're looking at your notes, that is not a great sign. That is not an indication of a great business presentation. Or you're not going to look at the notes. And if you don't look at the notes, well then, why are you carrying the notes? I mean, you never looked at them. So either way, you don't want to carry the notes. But you like the notes. What you want to do is you want to try to figure out, where am I going to put my notes? Ideally, you want it somewhere you can get to very naturally, very casually. Maybe you put it on a table in the front of the room, or maybe you put it on the podium somewhere, but you want to have ready access to those notes so you can get there easily and conveniently. Always want to be diagonal from the decision maker. That's important, right? You never want to be on the same side of the room as your key person, as your key audience member. If you're on the same side, you sort of block their view of the screen, and you're a little too close to them. So you always want to be diagonally across from them on the other side. And then finally, you want to make sure you unplug the confidence monitor and you put your computer out of the way. Now, both of these are grounded in the same insight, which is you're never well off when you're not looking at your audience. Anytime you're doing a presentation, you want to be looking at your audience. And ideally, you want to be connecting with your audience, and you want to guide them through the presentation. And so you want to be doing, you want to say, okay, now look at me, look at me, look at me. Okay, now let's look up at the slides. Okay, good. Let's look back at it. Now, okay, now let's look back at me. Now let's look back at it. Now what happens is, if you're looking at your computer, or if you're looking at your confidence monitor, you lose that. Now, confidence monitors, people love them, but they tend to be real problems because they have you looking down and they have you looking away from your audience. So often when you have a confidence monitor, you'll be looking down like this, and all of a sudden you're no longer looking at anybody, you're looking at your confidence monitor, which you think is sort of nice, but actually breaks all the connection you might have built with the audience. So you always want to make sure you can. Now with a confidence monitor, what you want to do, turn it off, cover it up, shut it off, get rid of it. Very important. Also with computers and your computer, You want to make sure that is put out of the way so you can't really see it. But you want your computer to be nearby so you can get to it. The problem with computers is that we spend all of our day looking at computers. And so if we see one, we're inclined to look at it. That's going to naturally attract our eyes. So you always want to make sure you put your computer somewhere where you can get to it, but at the same time, you can't really see it. And that means you're not going to spend your time looking at it all of the time as you go through your presentation. All right, final thing, number 5, you want to be nervous and you want to project confidence, which seems a little bit like an oxymoron, I think, but it is really true. When you're doing a business presentation, you really want these two feelings coming across. You want to be nervous and you want to project confidence. It's a strange mix of things. I think it's a little bit like when you're about to start a big race. So I've done, the Chicago Triathlon a lot, many, many years. But every year at the start is the same feeling. On the one hand, I'm always like, oh no, this is terrible. I'm going to die. I don't know why I signed up for this. I'm going to drown this year for sure. But on the other hand, I'm like, I've done it 10 times. I can do this. I've done it before. I can do it again. And you have this mix of feelings. So the question is, how do you tap into these things? Now, the first thing to remember is that you should be nervous. A lot of people say to me, Tim, I'm not a good presenter. I get so nervous. And that, I think, is just so profoundly wrong because you should be nervous. Scott Birkin, he's a big public speaker. We're programmed to fear being alone in open territory without a weapon and in front of a crowd. And I think he's right on that. Or Lucy Kellaway from the Financial Times. Unlike most phobias, being frightened of speaking in public is entirely rational. And it is. When you're going to go do a big business presentation with senior executives in your company, you should be nervous. You should be. Yeah. Well, because what's going to happen? If it goes well, beautiful things will happen. Your career is going to advance. You're going to get promoted. You get a big bonus. You're going to build your personal brand. It's going to be great. And what happens if it goes poorly? Right? You know what happens? You get fired. And that's it. And by the way, it can happen. And if you've seen this, where you have these business presentations and they just explode and you can destroy your career at that moment. So if that doesn't make you a little bit nervous, I don't know what's going on in your life, but you should be nervous when you're doing a big presentation. All right, so how do you then project confidence at the same time? Well, the first thing to remember is that being nervous is all good, right? When you're nervous, you're alert, you're focused, you're on edge, you're antsy, you're energetic. These are all good things when you're presenting. Also, if you're really nervous about a business presentation, what are you going to do? Right? You're going to do, you're going to check your numbers. You're going to make sure that the flow of the presentation is right. You're going to practice, right? And if you do all of this, it's going to help your presentation go better. So if you're nervous, it's all a very good thing. Still, you want to project confidence. How do you do that? Number 1, you want to go in there and remember that you're the expert. So anytime you're doing a presentation, you are almost always the expert on that topic. That's why you're doing the presentation. And you just want to remind yourself of that. And walk in and say, I do know this topic. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. When I was at Kraft, I remember we would do presentations on Parquet margarine. And we spent a lot of time on Parquet margarine. But I, at the time, was running the Sticks of Parquet, that little business. And anytime I did one of those presentations, though, it was always fine, right? Because I knew the presentation was going to go okay because I walked in saying, you know what, I am today, as I stand here, the world's expert on sticks of Parquet margarine. And I know that because I'm the only person in the world who spends all day, every day studying that business, which makes me sort of an expert on the topic. So you walk in there with that frame of mind. Second thing, use your slides. If you're worried about forgetting something in your presentation, just put it on the slide. They're there for your audience. They're also there for you. If you use your slides, you won't forget things, and you'll avoid awkward moments like this one.
And I will tell you, it's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5, okay. So commerce, education, and the
EPA?
EPA, there you go. No, okay.
Let's talk deposition.
Seriously? Is EPA the one you were talking about? Or?
No, sir. No, sir. We were talking about the agencies of government. EPA needs to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that.
But you can't name the third one?
The third agency of government,
Yeah.
I would do away with the education, the
Commerce.
commerce, and let's see. I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Oh, well, that was a great moment for Rick Perry. the way we avoid moments like that is we use our slides. And if we're worried about forgetting something, just put it on the slide. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to remember things, struggle to remember the numbers. Third thing to keep in mind is you always want to know the numbers. So in a business presentation, this is just incredibly, incredibly important. If you put a number in a business presentation, you want to know the number. Where did it come from? What does it mean? What's the source of the number? How does it relate to last year? This isn't easy, by the way, because you'll see a number like 30% market share and you'll say, well, that's obvious. That's an easy number. No, that's not an easy number. Well, what is that? Is that share? Is that dollar share? Is that unit share? Is that year to date? How does that compare to last year? Does that include a 53rd week? What's the source of that number? And all of these things, if you know it all, it's beautiful. Because then when somebody asks about it, you can say, well, here's what the number means. Let me tell you all about the number. And you come across as very knowledgeable and very much an expert. If you don't know the number, you can get yourself into real trouble. Senior management, by the way, they tend to be very nervous about the numbers because they want to make sure the team understands the numbers. And if they think you don't know where the numbers mean or where they're coming from, you can get into some very big problems. This is how business presentations often sort of blow up. People lose track of the numbers. So this video here is sort of a classic one. So this video, I'll just show you this. This is a British politician. And she had called into a radio show, and she had just explained their plan. And their plan, they were going to hire 10,000 new police officers, and they had a budget for £80 million to do that. And that's what they had set aside to pay for the program. Here's how it unfolded from there.
80 million is the figure we
Yeah,
use.
yeah.
But if you, I don't understand. If you divide 80 million by 10,000, you get 8,000.
What we're
Is that what you're going to pay these policemen and women?
No, we're talking about a process over 4 years.
I don't understand. What is he or she get? 80 million divided by 10,000 equals 8,000. So what are these police officers going to be paid?
We will be paying them the average...
Has this been thought through?
Of course it's been thought through.
Where are the figures?
The figures are that the additional cost in year one, when we anticipate recruiting about 250,000 policemen, will be 64.3 million.
250,000 policemen?
And women.
So you're getting more than 10,000. You're recruiting 250,000.
No, we are recruiting 2,000 and perhaps 250. And the cost...
So where did 250,000 come from?
I think you said that, not me.
No, I can assure you said that figure because I wrote it down.
And this
What I'm
goes
saying
on
about
and
the
on. You
cost
sort of get the gist
is
of
in
it
year
here.
one,
But
obviously, we're getting ready.
this is a case where she just starts she loses track of the numbers, and then she starts trying to grasp for these numbers. But the audience keeps hitting, and it's just a total disaster. The way you avoid this problem in a business presentation is you know the numbers. Finally, you've got to go ahead and practice. The more you practice a presentation, the better it's going to go. There's lots of ways to practice a presentation. Some people like to videotape themselves. I find that a rare form of torture, so I can't do that. But you can walk through your presentation. You can present to your dog, to your coffee cup, to your plant, to your colleagues, lots of different ways to go through a presentation. But if you go through it, what happens? Your transitions get better, you have a sense of the timing, and you also are okay if there's a technical problem. There's always technical problems in the world, and if there's a technical problem, and if you really know your presentation, if you've practiced it, you're going to be okay, and you're going to avoid awkward moments like this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, director and producer Michael Bay. Good afternoon, Michael.
How is everyone today? My job as a director is I get to dream for a living.
Michael, you're known for such unbelievable action. What inspires you? How do you come up with these unbelievable ideas?
I create visual worlds that are so beyond everyone's normal life experiences. And Hollywood is a place that creates a viewer escape. And what I try to do is, as a director, I try to... the type is all off, sorry, but I'll just wing this.
Tell us what you think.
Yeah, we'll wing it right now. I try to take people on an emotional ride, and
The curve? How does it? How do you think it's going to impact how viewers experience your movies?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Michael Bay for joining us.
All right, disaster. Right, and you know what happened in that presentation, though. They had the material. They sent him out. They said just read, the teleprompters, and you'll be fine. He hadn't practiced it. He went out there. There was a technical problem. Total disaster. Completely fell apart. The way you avoid this problem is you practice. So, presentations, they're super important. A lot of people rely, I think, on the wrong models. And then 5 things to keep in mind. Be clear on the purpose. Start by finding the story. Pre-sell it. Set the room. Be nervous and project confidence. All right. Now, if you want to learn more about presenting, you can go ahead and track down a copy of that book, How to Wash a Chicken, or you can get in touch with me. I'm easy to reach. Lots of different venues to do that. HowToWashYourChicken.com. That's got lots of materials on it. You'll be surprised to hear that domain was actually available. So anyway, let's do some questions though, and let's spend just a little bit of time and answer your questions and see what we got. So let me shift over my see what's coming in terms of questions. All right. All right. So one question here we have is, how do you present to a group of investors when there's no clear leader in that group? So what happens when you're going into a meeting and you don't really know who's the most important person in the room? Well, what I would do in that case is I would still pick a person. Some of the toughest presentations are when they are general and when they're sort of vague presentations. It's a little bit like advertising. Advertising that tries to appeal to everybody often doesn't appeal to anyone very well. So if you're presenting to a lot of people, what I would still do is I'd say, okay, let's think about somebody who's going to be in that room. And let's think about what I know about that person and how we resonate with them. If you do that, then you'll know for sure that the presentation is resonating with somebody, and it's going to be more likely to resonate with the whole group. When you try to address everybody in a presentation, it really doesn't work out that well. You want to design it for a specific person. All right, let's do another one. For interview presentations where you have limited data and visibility and need to present a plan, and where exercise is more about assessing, how do you think rather than substance? What do you recommend? Okay, so this is the scenario where you're doing an interview, and presumably they just want to see how you think and how you put together recommendations. It was interesting, actually. My daughter just had to do this the other day. She was interviewing for a summer job, and they sent her an Excel spreadsheet, and they said, why don't you just turn this into a recommendation for us, a presentation? So she had to go through this exact exercise. The big thing I would do is follow exactly the steps we just talked about. When people are looking for, in an interview, when they're looking to see how you think, what they're really trying to figure out is, can this person make sense of complex situation? Can this person sort of turn this world into recommendations? So I would be very disciplined, and I would stick to the process. And I would stick to having those 5 elements, right? Put a title page, right? Have a purpose, have an executive summary, have at the end next steps and follow-ups. And then I would put together pages that are simple and easy to follow with headlines. What happens when you do this is that you really stand out and you come across as really strategic and really smart, and it's going to help you do incredibly, incredibly well in the interview. She actually got her job, of course. She had read my book, so she got her job, and it worked out great. And again, thinking about how do you turn it into a story is going to help you enormously. All right, let's go. Other questions here. Okay, so the question here is, what's the worst presentation I've seen, and why did it fail? And does success mainly depend on the content of the presentation or the delivery of the presentation? All right, so a bunch of work with there. So the worst presentation I saw was back at Kraft, and one of my colleagues was doing this presentation, and it was just one of those incredibly painful moments where they became so paralyzed with fear. They basically were speechless and motionless, and they were stumbling, and they were, and it was so bad that it was one of those presentations where you just felt so bad for the person, and all you wanted was for them to get off and do okay, and one of these really awkward moments. The way you avoid this problem, by the way, is if you build good slides, even if everything goes haywire in your presentation, you can just read the darn slides. Just read the headlines and point to the pages and and you're going to avoid. So even if you're feeling paralyzed with fear, you're like, no, I'm just going to read my headlines. I can do that. And I'm going to talk about what's on the page. And you trust it. And what's happened is you're going to get going, and you're going to get going as it goes forward. The question of, is it more about substance or delivery? I am a huge proponent of focusing on substance and making sure the presentation is written right. Delivery, I think some people have a real flair for delivery and some people don't, quite honestly, and I don't think that really matters. If a presentation is constructed well, it's going to work. And if a presentation is not constructed well, you become very dependent on the delivery. So I would say if you're nervous about a presentation, work on the flow, work on the story. If the pages naturally go one to the next, to the next, to the next, well then you really don't depend on technique of delivery at all. And whether you like to use, gestures, little ball, medium-sized, big ball, it doesn't matter because the darn story is sort of going to tell itself. At that point, if you're an adequate presenter, if you're okay, that's fine. It's going to work just fine. If you're great, that's always better, of course. But it doesn't matter. Focus on the content more than the style. And I think if the content is rock solid and logical and tight, that's what's going to win the day. All right, we got time, maybe one or two more. I'm using a lot of hand gestures and body language. Thank you. What's a good rule of thumb for establishing a balance there? I imagine that too much walking around can distract from the message imparted, and I think that is very, very fair. I would do whatever you're comfortable doing. Some people are very demonstrative people. They love big gestures. It's part of what they do. They love, the big thing, and and other people aren't. They're quieter and they're more restrained and more refined. And I think both can be fine. What's most important when you're presenting is you want to come across as earnest and confident and sincere. And to do that, you've got to present in a way that works with your style. So if you're a very demonstrative person, if you're up there saying, that's not going to work. And likewise, the other way, if you're a very sort of introverted, quiet person, it can be very tough to be big picture. I think you want to do what's right for your style. And I think if you do that, it's going to be okay. You also, by the way, want to present in a way that's consistent with your brand. So if you have a brand that is all about creativity and energy and excitement, well, then when you write your presentation and deliver it, you're going to want to capture that. So if you show up with a very flat presentation that's very sort of corporate, and people are going to be like, what happened? That's very inconsistent. On the other hand, if you're very much of a tight numbers person, you like precision, and you show up with bright colors and things popping in and out, all these crazy animations, people are going to say, wow, that seems very strange there too. And I think you want to deliver in a way that works for you. Everybody's different in what they're comfortable with, and I think you want to find that. The more you present, the more you'll figure out what's your style, what you're most comfortable with, right? We probably have time for one more, I think. So let's do one more here. What's the best strategy to deal with the skeptical and critical audience that would love to see your idea fail? All right, so this I love. This is when you're going into a room and you're presenting and you know that everybody doesn't like the idea. Well, first thing is you really want to know that ahead of time. So the worst is when you walk into a presentation and you think it's going to go well, but in reality, it's just a disaster. Now, if that's happening, that means you did not pre-sell it. You did not do the work up front. If you're going to walk into a room and you know nobody supports it, well, a couple things. Number one, maybe you should rethink that recommendation. There might be a reason why everybody doesn't like it. And so that's the first question. If you still think it's right, well, then you want to structure your presentation with that in mind. For example, right, you could go in and you could say there's two ways to look at this situation, or there's three ways, right? There's this way, and there's this way, and let's talk about all three ways. Then at least your audience is nodding their head for maybe path number one. And you could talk about path number one and debate that before you get onto the more controversial part of it. The other thing I'll leave you with is the idea of altitude. One of the things I believe in when you're constructing a presentation and delivering a presentation is the altitude theory. It goes like this. On a plane flight, altitude is really important in the middle of a plane journey, right? And in the middle of a plane journey, when you've got a lot of altitude, it really doesn't matter if you hit some turbulence. If you're flying along at 35,000 feet and you lose 1,000 feet of altitude, really not a big deal. On the other hand, when you're taking off, when you're landing, a little bit of turbulence can be a very, very scary thing. The same theory is true in a presentation. At the beginning, turbulence is difficulty. Conflict is difficulty. Because at the beginning of a presentation, you really want to get settled, get your feet under you, figure out where you are. Also, the end of a presentation is really scary. So if I'm going into a room and I know I'm going to get hard questions and people are going to be angry and upset, I want to put the controversial stuff in the middle of the presentation. So I pick up some momentum, I get settled. When I hit it, I'm ready for it. I know it's coming, and then I can figure out how do we work through it. If all goes well, by the time we get to the end, we land it, and we're all back together. If you have more questions on presenting, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm around. I love talking about presenting and doing business presentations. It is something I think that we all struggle with, and we're never perfect. It's one of these endeavors that we keep working on it. We keep working for tips and suggestions as we go forward. I want to thank today, though, the Harvard Alumni Association for having me here, for having me as part of this event. I want to thank the production team today for all of their work with this event. It's been fun to be a part of this, and I look forward to keeping in touch and engaging with the Alumni Association as we go forward. Have a great rest of the day. Here's to some great presentations.